welcome folks to today's webinar, which is co-organized by United Nations Development Program in Pakistan and National Dialogue Forum on a very important issue, which is about young people in prisons and how they can be reintegrated and rehabilitated in the society. And my name is Danish Khan. I am political economist by training. I'm a non-resident fellow at the National Dialogue Forum. And I have great panel with me today. I have Ms. Sarah Bilal, who is Executive Director of Justice Project Pakistan, and she has been representing the most marginalized and vulnerable segments of society legally and for many years, and she has received multiple awards, most notably Franco-German Human Rights Prize in 2016. And I also have with me Valerie Khan. She has been living in Pakistan for more than 2 decades, and she is Executive Director of a non-profit group called Group Development Pakistan, which focuses on the improving policy and legal framework in terms of protecting children's rights, and and her work is to promote more judicial reforms in Pakistan with the focus on children's rights. Then I also have with me Iqbal Ahmed Tito, who is a member from Sindh for National Commission on the Rights of Children, and he has been again working on this issue for many decades. And he's also a member of Provincial Monitoring Committee on Prevention of Child Marriages. And he knows the system from inside. And then I have with me Babar Ghani, who's a social scientist from LUMS, and he looks at these issues with a data oriented approach, and he analyzes this issue with the focus on Pakistan. And I would like to start with the broad question so our audience can get to know about this issue well. And the first question that I would like to raise is, how should we conceptualize imprisonment, right? At a more philosophical and abstract level. And I would like to start by giving few ideas. And again, this is coming from a political economist who doesn't know well the legal structure, but who has some broad understanding of the society. So I see this issue in 2 broad ways, right? So one is we can look at any crime for that matter from both an individual lens, where we see some individual made a choice and as a result, they are punished, right? So that's one way of looking at it. Or we can also look at how individuals make choices, right? Are they not mediated or regulated by the societal factors? So if we look from that perspective, we see that individual choices are regulated by the societal factors. Therefore, when any crime is committed, it's not just the individual who needs to be blamed, but it's also the whole society which is producing that outcome. So therefore, from that perspective, I see rehabilitation and correction as the way forward for any crime, and especially in the case of children, because they are more prone to they're more vulnerable, I guess, than adults. So therefore, we need to look at this whole paradigm in terms of rehabilitation and reintegration. So this is more from a very broad political economy framework, but I like Sarah to go first and address how you conceptualize this issue.
No, I think that was a really good framing. Thank you for inviting me here, and I'm really happy that this discussion is taking place. Look, from a point of view of prisons in Pakistan, talking about children being tried for crimes and children being punished for crimes is just absolutely a ridiculous thought, really. And unfortunately, that is our reality. When we talk about juvenile offenders, we're talking about children being put in jail. however you want to sugarcoat it, but that is the reality of it. Now, anybody who's had children, I have two young children, would know that they hardly know what they're doing most of the time. And like you mentioned, that they're very vulnerable. So for the law to kind of treat them in any way, shape, or form similar to how they think about adults or how they treat adults is ridiculous. Also, talking about the vulnerability of children and why the prison system is just completely, or the criminal justice system is completely ill-suited to it, the way that it's currently framed. Or currently, the way it's laid out is that it's the criminal justice system requires the so-called criminal or the accused to be able to defend themselves. In order to defend themselves, they have to be able to instruct their lawyer and to comprehend what's going on around them. Now, I can tell you that I went to 5 years of law school, or however many it was, to do my bar, and I still barely know this much of the law. So to expect a child that comes from a background where you might not have had the best start in life, you might not have had access to the same level of education, to expect a child to understand something like the criminal justice system and to be able to defend themselves and participate in it is just it's just an illogical idea. And then the result of that being that we separate them from society and we somehow put them in these centers for their correction or rehabilitation. I mean, it's just, I don't think it works. And I would be interested to see where it works. I think anytime you take a child out of their community and out of their family or a place of, or anytime you separate them, you're further damaging the child permanently. So, but I'm not the child right expert here. I'm just telling you as a lawyer, I find the thought that children are somehow supposed to navigate the criminal justice system to be an absolutely ridiculous idea, really.
Great insights, and I just like to add like one more point. Like, so as you mentioned, it's also the class background matters, right? Like the socioeconomic background, the gender, the ethnicity, all of these factors collectively uh, affect how folks would approach legal system and what resources they have in terms of fighting against or against their trials. So in that sense, we cannot separate class, gender, and other categories, which put some folks at a disadvantage than others. And taking this forward, I'd like Babar to jump in and share his thoughts on this.
Thank you very much, Danish. I have to agree with Sarah from an emotional point of view. But from a practical point of view, I feel like obviously, detaining 10-year-olds, tweens, preteens, even early teens is just ridiculous. But I think we recently had an episode where the recent assassination of that person who claimed to be a prophet is being tried as a juvenile, which I feel sure. So I don't want to comment on the legal aspect of that. I'll let Sarah do that. But yes, there has to be some sort of system for punishing. So juveniles, let me start by defining it, is anyone under 18 years of age. So if they haven't, achieved maturity, which is defined legally speaking as 18 years old. Now, if somebody is 17 and they go around, murdering, mentally, I would like to call, I'm not a psychologist either, but I feel like somebody who comes to Pakistan and claims to be a prophet must have some psychological issues. I would even go so far as to call it mental disabilities. And then somebody assassinating them, murdering them, really, and then being tried as a juvenile, I feel leaves a lot to be desired. Anyways, I think that is not the issue. The issue is that we have 7 juvenile detention centers in Pakistan. Uh, 5 of them are in Sindh and 2 of them are in Punjab. Unfortunately, I assume Magan Saab was unable to join us for this meeting, the former IG prisons, who would be in a much better position to speak about that. But so there are no juvenile detention facilities in KP, in Balochistan, in AJK, GB. Uh, yeah. So that's a big issue. So where they don't have any juvenile facilities, um, they might assign a small portion of the existing prison for juveniles, but they're still part of the same prison, which is a recipe for disaster, clearly. Having, 16, 17 years old children in the same place as hardened criminals, terrorists. Um so that again is uh, one of my favorite lines from a Johnny Depp movie, Blow, is that he went to prison to get a master's degree in crime. He went there as a petty criminal and came out as a criminal mastermind. So that is what we are doing by putting juveniles in prison with hardened criminals, seasoned criminals. The other statistic that I would like to point out, which was the major finding of our research into prisons in Pakistan, uh, 2/3 of the Pakistani prison population are under trial prisoners. So they have not been convicted of any crime, and they are under trial for years and years.
You see, you built your identity, you built yourself as a human being largely through transgression. And the role of an educator and parenthood is all about guiding the child towards, learning from those transgression. And I mean, we all have been children. We all, thanks God, have made mistakes, and we're, guided and we were told what was, wrong, what was not. We were, I hope, as much as possible, encouraged to reflect upon our actions and the consequences and propose or identify way to amend, basically. So that's an ideal pedagogical setup, but this is ideally the logic of what education should be. Now, when you look at the profile of those children in conflict with the law, I rather like to use that expression. There is definitely a socio-economic factor. Most of those children belong to low socio-economic level. And there is often other factors such as what, let's say challenges within the families. It's not uncommon to have children who have had abusive parents, who have been runaways, this kind of things. And secondly, when you look at the psychological profile of several of those juvenile accused, I have yet to find a juvenile accused, I'm talking in the context of Pakistan, who has not been abused himself in different manner and sustained and repetitive manner. Now, this is not to say that being abused justified abusing others or committing a crime, but this is to say that you need to take into consideration circumstances from an overall socio-economic and psychosocial perspective to understand the drivers of ending up in conflict with the law as a child. And the problem when we label those children as bad children who don't really, deserve empathy or you should be punished, is that as a state or as citizens, we conveniently forget our responsibility in not being able to protect those children from falling in conflict with the law. And in here, I would like to call upon citizen responsibilities and state responsibility to say, not to hurt yourself, but say, okay, we have an issue, what can we do about it? So I'm going to be the fun spoiler here because I'm an optimist. And so even if I know we have challenges, I think that there is a huge momentum currently going on in Pakistan among actors of justice. And that is certainly not to say that things are perfect, but there is really, tangible efforts to reform the criminal justice system So first of all, we need to refer to the enactment of the Juvenile Justice System Act in 2018, who shifts totally from a retributive approach to a reformative approach. Accepting, and that's a major political shift, accepting to take responsibility for the state failure, and let's face it, the parental failure to protect the child, and then try to find a solution which is going to bring back the child towards a healthy environment and a healthy behavior as a citizen. I'll stop here for now.
Thank you. Very well put, and some great points. And we'll come back to the reforms point that you have raised. So next, I'll come to the Iqbal Ahmed Saab, and I would want him to share his thoughts.
Thank you, Danish. As previous speakers touched on various aspects, let me just briefly go back on the legal and institutional framework which we used to have and what we are today. And as Valerie mentioned, that come in conflict with law, the last stage is the deprivation of their liberty, that is the prison system. So I will also touch briefly the earlier stage, why a child or a juvenile lands into the prison system, what are the other areas. So no doubt, the whole approach of the criminal justice system, as emphasized by speaker, has been the punitive, retributive. In Prison Act 1894 and the Prisoners Act 1900. And when we come forward, we will see that the whole paradigm of that prison or prison management or the confinement to deter the offender from the society and to punish them and to give a lesson to the society so that there should be a deterrence effect. So deterrence and retributive theory was the major paradigm of that era. But even we, at that time, we have a Reformatory School Act 1897. If we look back to the 1897 Reformatory School Act, where the juvenile, at that time, the juvenile in CRPC, in Criminal Procedure Code, recognized, and still that is recognized, I think Sarah will bear me, that the section 29B of the CRPC still defines juvenile as below 15 years. So section 8 of the Reformatory School Act 1897 called upon a police that if the punishment is not the transportation and the life imprisonment, the discretionary power was with the magistrate for the lenient punishment to a child offender. After that, when we come back, even in Sindh, there used to be a Bombay Children Act 1924. And in Bombay Children Act, you can imagine the level of the progressiveness of the laws and institutions continent when the Geneva Declaration after the World War was being adopted in the League of Nations there. Here, the Bombay Children Act was so progressive that it talked about the certified schools, that it talked about the vocational, they talked about not only in the public sector, but it was talking about the registration of such institution in the private realm and domain. And so the Bombay Children Act was replaced by the 1955 Sindh Children Act. And Sindh Children Act, we have a two. One is the remand home. In 26 section of the Sindh Children Act, children below 16 years were supposed to be housed in the remand home, and remand home was to be managed by the non-professionals. And this is the approach, the progressiveness of that law, that it talked about managed by a superintendent, but it was just like a school. And the Youthful Offender Industrial School, that was still the institution in the section 25 and certified. But what happened after one unit, this law went into abrogation, and when one unit was reverted back, so this was not so that we in Sindh we have a progressive law. In Punjab we have a post, we have many other progressive laws. Now, apart from that, it is not only the custodial measures for keeping the children. One was the educational and vocational through remand homes, certified schools, juvenile jails, and other was through the non-custodial measures, and that was the good conduct of Prisoners Act 1926, its rules 27, and probation of offenders ordinance 1961. What happened, unfortunately, that the paradigm of retributive and deterrence overwhelmed the reform approach, and these non-custodial measures were pushed. What is the result? Still now, Valerie Khan and other people who are practicing in such area, they will bear with me that after 18th Amendment, not a single province has adopted the probation of offenders ordinance. Not a single province has, because you cannot do reintegration without parole and probation department. Reintegration is not the mandate of the prison department. And still, what the Sindh government has done, if Magan Saab may be listening to my, uh, the Sindh children, the Sindh Prison and Correctional Facilities Act in 2019, which has been enacted, that's a very progressive law, and the rules they had made, they are very good progressive, but correction department under the prison department. And this is the approach we should come out of this thing, that the very the very department which is supposed to discipline, or which is supposed to carry out the judgments where the law liberty and movement is done, how they can enforce the correction within that system, because that has to be given to the reclamation and probation departments. So this area of non-custodial measures for the reintegration, for the probation, it is still a neglected area, for which I say that, like the Sarah and Valerie and many other people, they can take it to the policy makers, they can create the debate, they can create the policy issue, so that, so yes, Sindh has enacted the law, KPK has enacted the, still in other areas is that, okay, what I'm trying to say, that the, when we say child in conflict with law, the primary purpose is that when police arrest a child, detain a child, probation still now is a judicial function as per the statutes. Okay, executive function as well. So the problem is the police at the police station level is not having a probation approach which allows further reintegration.
You are excluding them from social life. The least you can do is provide them the opportunity for an education. And in most cases, as far as I've seen, they work pretty well. Also because poor kids, they don't have any other outlet. It's not like they can waste their time in the bazaars or anything like that. So they do concentrate more on their education, whatever facilities are provided. So again, as well as that, there is psychological support available to them at whatever level. Obviously, it's not the top level that you would hope, but it's better than having nothing at all. So yes, juvenile prisoners are treated, even when they are part of the regular prisons, they're treated differently. Some of the regular prisons have schools in them. So, and of course, you need to do that because you still have a chance of corrections with juveniles. You know, with hardened criminals, there may be less of a chance for that. But with children, almost majority of the cases, if not 99%, they have made a mistake. They have not understood the consequences of their actions. They have been misled by someone to carrying out an illegal act, and they're paying for that mistake. But they shouldn't be made to pay for it, too heavy a price. They should be afforded chances for reintegration and rehabilitation, and that is done particularly in the juvenile prisons. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. And Valerie, I mean, I would like you to jump in here. So in terms of what are the major bottlenecks you see in terms of the juvenile prison system in Pakistan, and what are some suggestions?
Okay, so first of all, the concept of juvenile prison is a bad concept, okay? Juvenile's place is not in a prison. Juveniles, as per law, from a statutory perspective and practically, have to be in a rehabilitation center. So when we quote rules and other laws, I have only one answer. The Juvenile Justice System Act has an overriding effect. As far as the other laws are concerned, bye-bye, okay? We need to get that in. This is a statutory reality, number one. Secondly, and the rules cannot proceed over a law, especially a special law, which has an overriding effect, okay? So we need to accept what the legislator, what the state, because this was a law which was, again, proposed by the state, it's very important to say it, has understood and taken ahead. Now, the problem is that first, because it's new, we have a lack of awareness, number one, and secondly, we really also have a lack of not only awareness, but understanding of that new concept. And that's normal, reform takes time. We all need to learn new realities. So I think what the National Judicial Policy Making Committee of the Supreme Court has currently done, which has been to order that judicial officers and prosecutors should be trained on the concept of child rights and justice with children now, as per the World Congress for Child Justice, is critical, because we need to understand that you do not stop and you do not transform a child who has violated the law into a positive citizen by exposing that child to more violence. This is as simple as that, okay? Violence begets violence, and as Babar said earlier, prisons, or the current system which is being in place, even when it is not prison, is a university to become a bigger criminal. And in terms of, because I know that your underlying theme is contrarian extremism, we know that these are places where those networks are present, when there is a reach out, and then even if it is not within those structures, when you get out of those structures, those are the networks and the structures who will be waiting for you because you have no alternative support mechanism. So what the state has very intelligently planned, understood and prepared is a comprehensive mechanism, which is what? At a pre-trial level, which means, all right, that's a child before 10, the problem does not exist because the minimum age for criminal responsibility is 10 years of age. And then according to the judge assessment, if he or she thinks that the child does not understand the consequences of his or her act, it can be up to 14 years of age. As per General Comment 24 of the UNCRC, the minimum age for criminal responsibility should be 14 in any case. And that is linked, yeah, whatever. That's what the international community says. So we have, what we need to do is first work on this preventive measure where you say, okay, this is a child who does not understand fully the consequences of his or her act. And we're going to practice what we call diversion, which means you don't take the child to the formal justice system, and you try in a monitored manner under the supervision of the Juvenile Justice Committee, reform that child into a healthy and positive functioning citizen, number one. That is imperfect. We have only 8 juvenile justice committees that have been established in Pakistan so far. Only 1 is operational in Peshawar, and for the first time in the history of Pakistan, 4 boys have a veil diversion. So that's a historical first, and we need to upscale that. Secondly, we need to have child-sensitive courts, what we call juvenile courts, because we also need to ensure that the judicial team is capable of assessing what happened to the child, the history of that crime, and propose a judicial solution, which is going to be a reformative one. For that, you need trained judicial team, you need a relevant environment, because the whole point is to avoid what we call secondary victimization. And thirdly, you need rehabilitation, and also, sorry, at the time of arrest, in order to avoid, the potential victimization that can happen with the police, you also need to notify observation home, which is yet to be done, but we're going to push for it. And later on, the last part, you need those rehabilitation centers. And that means that you need also to not only allocate resources, but I would say discuss at a multi-stakeholders level how to identify and better manage the existing resources, train them, and then design those rehabilitation programs, because we've been doing that in a very scattered manner. But a full tailor-made, it can only be tailor-made, rehabilitation program, which is then preparing the child for community reintegration. And that means, as Iqbal said, working from the prison with other departments later on is yet to be done.
Thank you. And next, Iqbal Ahmed, I would like you to jump in and share your thoughts. And also, I'd like you to talk about the violent extremism and criminality and how that, especially in terms of the prison system in Pakistan operates, and with particular reference to young people and juveniles.
First of all, the juvenile, there has been some improvement in the juvenile justice system, which is that at one time, there used to be more than 4,000 to 5,000 inmates in the juvenile. So with the promulgation of the JJSO and subsequently JJSA, this population is around half and so on. So number one, that is the progress in compliance with the UNCRC and other international obligations. Let me correct Babar Saab. Facilities in Sindh. There are 4 facilities. One is the Youthful Offender Industrial School in Karachi, Hyderabad, and Sakkar. And the 4th one is with the women prison. So one jail superintendent is managing. Might be other improvements in other provinces, but when I used to work with the Spark, there was in Haripur and Banu and Peshawar and in Kota, there used to be a juvenile ward in the Kota prison, and in much, but which has been closed now. And so in Punjab, Faisalabad and Bahawalpur, there used to be the postal institution. These are some institutional structures which are there and still need some reformation. Regarding implementation of which Valerie has very rightly mentioned, that there are many practical problems for the implementation. And number one is the legal aid, because interrogate with the juvenile until and unless a lawyer is there. So this panel of lawyer has to be notified by the district judges, which are the association according to their respective legislation, which is the bar practitioners, district bar association, legal aid committees. So this area is weaker. Number 2, police has to inform the probation officer. So the investigation officer at the down level, they do not know about the probation officer. So they had to link with the probation officer and the social welfare officer. Number three is the awarding of the bail. So as well, the police is supposed, given the bailable offense for release of a child, if a child is below 16 years and of minor and major, but judges are reluctant and they are defiant sizing this thing. So this training for the judges and prosecutor has to be there. And the new concept is the age determination. And age determination, which elaborates the steps. And then finally comes the divergent concept. Is that the police has not to submit the 173 report, but in CRPC they are supposed to submit in 14 days. Though this is a special law, but this has to be harmonized and internalized within the police and court system. And the Juvenile Justice Committee, it does not also have members from the police, or we can say the juvenile court is heading that. So this is again a mechanism where police, welfare, probation officer, the news, they need to harmonize themselves. Again, the juvenile rehabilitation centers. So all the Borstal or youthful offenders or remand homes, they had to be renamed as the rehabilitation centers. And more importantly, female probation officers, in case of if there is a female juvenile at the police station, she has to be placed at the probation of a, like there is no female probation officer till today. So is case in Balochistan, few in KP and Punjab. So this is the practical implementation of the juvenile. And courts are, of course, they have process and other things. So they need to be harmonized with the current CRPC, and because the PPC 82 criminal responsibility, which the Valerie was mentioning that it should be raised to the 14, but still even if 82 and 83 of the PPC is scrutinized by the prosecutors at the, I think most of the juvenile population will be free from the custodial measures, and further they can be put on the disposal of the probation. And the last thing, how to connect them with the employment, reintegration, because we need to destigmatize the juvenile. Because when we say juvenile, they are stigmatized, and when they pass the conviction, Chamber of Commerce and other, they are ready to employ them. So Ministry of Industries, Commerce and Labor departments, they need to be stakeholder so that the rehabilitation is there. And as, but that is dormant. There should be a sanctioned leave for the juveniles or the open prison for the vocational. So these are the new areas which are the challenges. Last, about the extremism cannot be eliminated by kinetic measures or by having high security prisons. But you had seen the Bunyad Islam bill in Punjab. So where you cannot criticize, where you can have a dissent. So these are the basic, I think the non-kinetic measures in the syllabus, curriculum, and the tolerance. These are the, and through maybe many other things, But extremism, I had reviewed few studies of the de-radicalization being done in Sindh prisons of the juveniles or in the internment centers in the KP. Religious thought which is being inculcated in them for the reformation. But I think in order to de-radicalize them, so we need to have a secular approaches as well. And I'm sorry to say, even the judgment on the probation, judges are ordering for the prisoners, they should attend the Jummah prayers or the church, Sunday churches, rather than ordering for a community services, going to the schools, going to the orphanages. So these are the approaches which we need to adopt. So I think I might have elaborated more. So if any question, I will be happy to.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That's great.
If I could just add to what Iqbal Saab said. So our research into prisons also revealed that the major cause of ineffectiveness of the criminal justice system is a major lack of effective coordination between the various pillars involved in the criminal justice system. So prisons, probation, police, and the judiciary, and the prosecution. If that was our main conclusion, that in order to sort out the problems with the corrections system, with the whole criminal justice system, there needs to be a much deeper collaboration. Almost they have to go hand in hand every step of the way, which it is not. So the same thing applies to the whole criminal justice system.
Thanks. So we got some really good questions from our audience as well, but the last few questions with Sarah, can you please discuss the unique challenges faced by the young female prisoners in Pakistan? Because there's a overall there's a gender discrimination, and there are a lot of barriers, and especially in terms of prison. What are those unique challenges?
So I would actually like to defer this question to Valerie, but I can speak to you about, there's been studies done, one by the UNODC, I believe, on the state of women in prison in Pakistan. And I know that the Legal Aid Society has done a couple of studies from Karachi Central Jail as well. And the statistics for women in prison in Pakistan reflect what the global statistics for women in prison are. You know, one, that women have a higher rate of pre-existing psychiatric disorders, or they suffer at higher rates of PTSD in prison, being separated from their children, having less access, less resources to have their family members come and visit them. The fact that we have fewer women's prisons means that even though under the prison rules in all 4 provinces, women are supposed to be kept separately in dedicated prisons, but you don't have those kind of prisons. We have only a few in Punjab. So, you know, a lot of them are kept in female wings of bigger prisons and kept then further away from their families because there's fewer of those kind of prisons. So, I mean, those are the gendered aspects that women prisoners face. Their diet, their hygiene requirements, I mean, all of those things are different than men. And they do require greater care. They have a higher rate of illiteracy. Their ability to earn money doing in prison labor, that's different. You know, so it's different in any sense, but I'm not qualified to talk about female children in prison because I haven't encountered that many of them. That's more Valerie's question, so I'd like to defer it to her.
Yes, please, Valerie, can you?
Okay, so well, actually, Pakistan doesn't have many female children in jail, actually, at least as a status of accused. It's a limited number of, there is a gender gap. When you look at children in conflict with the law, it's largely boys, basically, or maybe non-binary children, but who are from a sexual identity initially male, basically. But however, what happens is that for the few children who are female and in contact with the law, that's actually problematic, because if there are little structures for boys, there is literally none as far as the female children in conflict with the law are concerned. So when it happens, they're actually sent to adult women's sections and mixed with adults. So that's actually problematic. Because this is a violation of the child, and then their childhood, you know, they are just women. They are not teenage girls anymore. So it's really a denial of who you really are. However, there is a trend and a tendency within the judiciary to try to actually, you know, the other aspect is also the positive discrimination. When they can put those girls in probation and everything, they're actually trying to do so, because, you know, it doesn't look good to send a girl in a prison. The problem is that really for that minority who goes into detention, then the scenario is really inadequate, and also the stigma which is faced by those female children in conflict with the law is even tripled compared to the boys. So that's something we're going to have to look into.
And again, this is it's a big emerging field. But are there any studies done on Pakistan which shows that how the violent extremism and the young folks in our prison or rehabilitation centers are intersect with each other? And again, kindly, because we're running out of time, so if keep it brief. Anyone? So Sarah, can you go for it?
Yeah, I just like to talk about this, because I think that, I mean, you can talk about prisons and rehabilitation, and we already know that that's a very difficult thing to impose in most correctional institutes, I guess, apart from maybe the Scandies have got it right for a little bit. But I mean, that's a huge effort. I'm not sure I agree with the framing of it in a further kind of, you know, countering violent extremism. For me, violence and, you know, people who end up in prison, as Valerie very eloquently explained, especially when you're talking about children, are people that we have failed as a society. And then, you know, we failed them on multiple levels, and then we failed them in the criminal justice system, we'll fail them as a society, as, you know, the parents, and then we've thrown them into prison, which is a fundamentally dehumanizing concept. It is a violent place. It is a dehumanizing place. It's hell on earth. And then we say, okay, well, this is where you're going to fix yourself. Or we're saying, you know, this is somehow where we're going to bring rehabilitation, reformation, and corrections. I mean, the whole idea I find to be quite ludicrous. And this is why for centuries, all societies have been struggling with this concept of reformation or rehabilitation in prison, because that's not what we are able to do because of the way that our prisons are structured. It's fundamentally retributive. It's been meant to actually forget people, just lock them away so we don't have to deal with them, and lock them away for as long as we can. We just don't want to deal with them as a society. But when we start then picking hairs and saying countering violent extremism, countering this, I find that to be a further kind of an obfuscation. Because again, even if you have kids that have committed crimes or, you know, what we call to be extremist crimes, I mean, look at where they're coming from. And, you know, we failed them as a society. I mean, somebody else on this panel talked about how we need to have secular education. True, I'd begin with saying we should have education to begin with. I mean, when you're looking at people that come from Balochistan, that come from KP, that are refugees essentially, or displaced, internally displaced people in the bastis in Karachi and Lahore and stuff, these are people who have been failed by the state. They don't have a school to go to. Their births aren't registered. I mean, Pakistan has the lowest birth registration rate, one of the lowest in the world. And it varies remarkably from province to province. So you might have a 76% birth registration in Punjab. It drops in Sindh, but in Balochistan, it goes down to single digits, and so does it for FATA. So, I mean, you know, I think it's somewhat disingenuous to pick up an outcome at the end, which is when you're in the prison and, you know, being so-called radicalized, and not to talk about the systemic problems that lead to that outcome, because you're never going to solve this until you can actually adequately frame and talk about this. And I would much rather talk about this than talking about this, because this is like putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. I don't think it works. I'm sorry. That was my spiel on CVE.
No, this was terrific. I really loved your response, and this ties back to our earlier, like the framing that we started with, that we can't just blame individual choices on this matter, and especially when it comes to children and young people. And we're still living in the age of pandemic. I would like to conclude with this question, and this ties with the broader discussion as well. How many resources we are allocating to overall these correction centers, and if we have any number on that, and especially in terms of the pandemic, it seems like because prisoners are more vulnerable than the rest of the society. So any thoughts on this?
Danish, if because when this pandemic came, and we because as a member of National Commission on Rights of Child, and previously worked with other institutions, so we were very much fearful about the outbreak of such pandemic situations in the jails, and particularly because all were vulnerable, even adult or female or juveniles, all were equally. But uh, I must say, might be Valerie and Sarah has, because you had seen how one, uh, how the courts in one province and one territory came about that thing, and how the highest court of country came to the populism, and that populism is connected the very notion of the retributive and punitive justice, because in public policy, when you talk about the deviant and dependent groups, it is the very context setters, they don't buy this approach. And you saw that the highest courts of the country, they downplayed the vulnerability aspect. And I'm sorry to say, most of the institutions prefer to remain silent on that issue, number one. Regarding, many, maybe international or national, sometimes we adopt the narratives, like Sarah was rightly saying, that the violent extremism narrative, while we say link it to the prisons or many other things. But the reality is still, which I believe, that the rehabilitation, I was analyzing the budget of the Sindh government of the prison, how much they spend on the fortifying the structures, of raising the walls, of buying the weapons, of buying the jammers. So will be in the Punjab, so will be in the KP, so will be others. If we analyze the budgetary portion with respect to the retributive versus the reformative, the rehabilitation, they are only initiated to be left for the Valerie or the Sarah, or for others, some people to have a banner over there, to have the dolls and some plastic chairs, like that thing. So this needs to be institutionalized, it needs to be sustainable in the programmatic approach. So therefore, I'm saying it is not the lack of resources. We have resources. How many billions of rupees are spent on fortification and buying weapons? I'm sorry to say, in Sindh, I was analyzing, the prison training institute is the least priority, where you cannot get the posting of some good officer. Everybody is going to get posting in some prison where they have a lucrative things. So this is the area, how much I was in the curriculum, one INL has called one meeting, and Sarah, I've told them that we are focusing only the discipline, we are focusing on the physical training, we are focusing, but how much we are focusing on the human rights and ethics, how much we are focusing on the innate behaviors, how much we are focusing on the inherent dignity and the basic value of a human, that has to be reflected into their training, their syllabus, their other approaches. So these are areas which are very neglected, unfortunately. And one last comment, Sarah was earlier saying, because you know why we ratify conventions, why we had become part of a GSP plus, it is because in international relations we talk about realism. It is the security and economic interest. Second, it is the instrumentalism, because we had a place on the table to sit, to be a member of the Human Rights Council, to be the leader of the G77, to be the leader of the Islamic OIC. This is the instrumentalism which they call for. The third one is the constructivism. Sarah will bear me, the constructivism and the liberalism, which convention which we had ratified out of love because society has evolved to accept that norm. Still, we are having a reservation about the Article 3 and 26 of the ICCPR. Still, we are having the reservations to the interpretation of the equality clause with the women. Still, we are having the other issues with the child rights. No doubt, National Commission on Human Rights, which is on a deathbed, Valerie, it is on a deathbed. You know, the members are not being elected. The
It'll be resurrected. Don't worry. Inshallah, it'll be resurrected. We can't let it die.
Hopefully, I understand you are with the Ministry of Human Rights, no doubt. But the issues, what I'm trying to say, yes, what I'm trying to say, they had the whole 21 million budget for the National Commission on the Rights of Child. What programs you will have? 21 million are sufficient for the travel of the one secretary to the Geneva or the minister for the New York. 21 million for the budget of the National Commission on the Rights of Child. How you can plan and implement the whole things? So this is what I'm trying to say, nothing with personal to anybody. What I'm trying to say, yes, for a GSP plus, yes, for other things, for a submission things, we need to have a reality check. And the reality check is this, that after 18th Amendment, you cannot have a roller coaster. When these areas are the provincial subjects, you need to strengthen them, you need to work with them, you need to coordinate with them, you need to collaborate with them. And whether any national human rights institution, you need to allow them to report as a, you know, as with the civil society. What happened in the Human Rights Council when the NCHR presented the report? See the law of the NCRC. It is not supposed to even give a report to the Committee on the Rights of Child. So the next periodic report will be by the government, and the powers and functions of the commission are saying that we can only support the government, means we cannot have accountability, we cannot have a voice. So this is what I'm trying to say. Yes, we are bridges between the civil society and government. Yeah,
we're running out of time, so we have to keep it short. So just last comment by each panelist, and then we'll conclude. Start with Sarah.
No, I think I've spoken enough, but I'd like to give my time to Babar and Valerie. I think they would have stuff to say.
I just had one or two points, particularly with regards to the resource allocation. When we were doing our research on prisons, and we have the privilege to visit quite a few prisons and speak to the prison authorities, Magan Saab, IG Prisons, was one of the people we interviewed. I was looking forward to seeing him again. So there was a very widespread sentiment that the prison population, the incarcerated people, are criminals. Why are we wasting resources on them when there are people going hungry outside these prisons? we need to minimize resources allocated for prisons. So, you know, khane tak theek hai. But so as you saw with the COVID-19, I'm not sure any additional resources would have been allocated to the prisons. Again, there was a mind-blowingly positive attempt at reducing overcrowding in prisons by releasing under trial prisoners, and you saw what happened to that. So there is a sentiment of considering prisoners as subhuman, unfortunately, which needs to be addressed as soon as possible. The other point that I wanted to make very briefly about women prisoners is that women prisoners, female prisoners, give birth, and those children that are born in prison remain in prison till their mothers are released from prison or whenever, and so they have not seen outside society till late in their life, which is just, to me, the most depressing thing spoken about today. So thank you.
Well, I think if I have a message to give is that, first of all, research shows that confinement is one of the worst treatment that you can give to a human being in general, but to a child in particular. So I think we now need to come to terms with the idea that the legislative framework has come up with a reformative approach that certainly may be strengthened, but this is the message that needs to be translated into an exercise of legal enforcement now. I think Pakistan has taken into consideration some of the recommendation of the ICCPR committee. So we now need to work on that. As I said, I'm an optimist. I'm working with the judiciary in Pakistan, with ministries, and I think those people really genuinely want to make a difference. And I think by taking care of a marginalized and a significant marginalized segment of the society, which is children in conflict with the law, and remembering that institutionalization has to be always used as a last resort and always in a reformative manner, then we will already have gone a long way. And I guess I'm looking forward to look at what's going to happen in the next, at least the next 3 to 5 years in Pakistan, because it's a very encouraging movement which is currently taking place, despite all challenges. But, you know, I want to focus on the solutions, really.
Great, thank you. It was a fascinating and very lively debate, and I really appreciate each one of you for your time and your thoughts. And based on this discussion, I would just like to wrap it up again with my own thoughts and pick in from your brains, is that overall the legal system bottlenecks are very complex, but they cannot be simply treated as a technical issue, but it's rather socio-political and economic issue, because it's the class, the ethnicity, the gender, the spatial dynamics of Pakistan. They collectively mediate and regulate the issues and the problems in the legal system, especially in terms of the rehabilitation and prison system in Pakistan. So it needs to be seen with this socio-political and economic lens to move forward. So the reforms cannot be just in isolation, but they have to be in terms of the broad framework where we try to build a more inclusive and egalitarian society, and then prison would also be more like rehabilitation center rather than a punishment or places where you isolate people to make them more vulnerable. So with this, I'd like to thank everyone, and also to our audience. We tried to incorporate their questions. They were great, but we missed some of those. So apologies for that. So thank you, everyone.